Types of communication, what mediums we can, or which formats or items we can use to communicate our information. First of all, we can write letters. Now see, whatever way of communication we are selecting, there are certain factors that we need to consider before. For example, if we are talking about letters, so letters usually we use in formal communication. I'm talking in business environment. So in formal communication, we use letters. Then if we specifically, if we need to communicate some information to external users or external stakeholders, then writing a letter in a formal format will be a better idea. Then second, memos. Memos basically are the documents that we write something or some information on that piece of paper, and then we are going to distribute it or we are going to send it to our employees or to our managers inside the organization. So for internal communication, we can use memos. We cannot use memos for external communications. So for internal communication, we are using memos, especially for P2P communication or peer-to-peer communication. We can use, like if I need to communicate some information to my colleague, so I can use a memo. That will be the best way. Third one, emails. Emails for external, I can use emails for external communication as well as for internal communication. For both sort of communication, I can use. Plus, emails can also be used as for formal as well as informal communication. So emails does provide more variety to us. And the last but not the least, formal reports. So whenever you are communicating any information to any external users, or if you are communicating some information to internal user, but at some senior level, then report writing will be a better choice. So these are the different ways in business that we can use to communicate our information. So it's really important to consider, like, for example, if you want to communicate any information to external user, like if you want to communicate some information with the government, so there's no way you can use memos. So that these things you need to consider, that whether we are communicating internally or externally, and what is the level of formalities required. So after that, we need to consider which type of communication we should use. Clear with types of communication?
Yes, sir.
Any
Sir,
question?
memos though, yes, memos, are they formal or informal, or they can be both as well?
They can be formal and informal, but we are only supposed to use it inside the organization for internal communications, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. After that, choosing a communication method. Now, whatever method we have decided to communicate our information, like we need to write a letter or a report or a memo or an email. So we need to consider these factors. These are very common factors that we need to consider. Time, how quickly we need to communicate that information. If you want to communicate some piece of information in a minute, for example, then definitely email will be a better option. But again, all these factors you need to consider while choosing the type of communication. Second, complexity. If you want to share some very complex kind of information with lots of data and numbers and formulas, so obviously memo is just a piece of paper. You cannot use a memo in that. If the information is highly technical or there's a higher complexity, then obviously report will going to be a better medium to use or to report that information. So report or maybe letter, obviously again will going to be a piece of paper. So on one page you cannot put so much information. So report will be a better option. Consider the distance, that to whom you are communicating and where the receiver is, inside the organization or outside the organization, within a city or maybe another city or another organization, same country or maybe another country. So you need to consider the distance and then you have to decide that how to report that information or communicate that information. Then written record. Sometime we does have some legal requirements to report that information into some specific format. So if there's some legal requirement, then obviously written record will be much more important. So in that scenario, maybe we need to write a letter or a report, and maybe even in hard copy, maybe. Sometimes there are also such requirements as well. So we cannot use electronic medium to communicate the information, especially when you are dealing with government. So it's always necessary to have a written record about all the communication. After that, feedback. What sort of feedback you need? For example, if you need some instant feedback about your report, so maybe you can attach a survey to that report as well. So what kind of feedback is necessary, whether feedback is necessary or not at all, so that we need to consider. Confidentiality. If we need to communicate some information and that's a very secret to the business, and that is very important to the business not to reveal to the third party, that confidentiality or level of confidentiality we also need to consider. Recipient, where the recipient is and how, what is the preference or personal preference of a recipient about receiving the information, that what we need to consider. And last but not the least, cost. If you're going to produce hard copies, that will going to cost more. If you're going to use electronic medium, that will going to cost less. So you need to consider the cost of communicating that information as well. So these are the factors that you need to consider while deciding what type of communication method you need to select. Clear with this slide?
Yes, sir.
Any questions so far?
No, sir.
Okay. Next, let's talk a little bit about the letters. For external communication, we use letters. Now, when we say external communication, it means external stakeholders. Who are external stakeholders? That anyone who exists outside the physical boundaries of your organization. It can be your employees. No, not employees, sorry. They are the internal, of course. It can be government. It can be bankers. It can be your lenders. It can be your shareholders, and so on. So to communicate any information to them, so letters will be a good option. Now, what are the things that we need to consider while writing a letter? Remember, letter writing, obviously, it's a formal way of communication. So you need to be polite. You need to be accurate with all your facts and figures that you are presenting. So 2 + 2 should be 4. It should be clear and logical. Logical means it should be in a proper format, like whenever you're writing a letter. So there are parts of letter, basically you need to properly write some opening lines to whom, first the receiver information, then the opening lines, then the main body of the letter, then conclusion, then closing the letter, and so on. So it should be in a logical sequence and concise. Letters, it's better to be of a 1 page, not more than that, especially when we are talking about business letters. So do not put any unnecessary information there. Be specific, be concise. Only write those things which are relevant to the receiver. Do not put any unnecessary things. If there are some tables or some kind of complex information, maybe later on you can email that information. Do not put on that everything on the face of the letter. Just be very concise with the letter. After that, appropriate references. If there is any references you're supposed to give, so do give the appropriate references. If you're using some numbers from somewhere that you have taken from the internet or from some book or something, so obviously you need to use an appropriate reference for that. Spelling and punctuation is very important. And if you have seen that we have lots of word processing softwares, and all of those word processing softwares just provide grammar and spell check. So do use that feature. So your letter should be correct in spelling and punctuation. Why? Because letters used for external communication. And if you're going to write a letter with spelling mistakes, so obviously this will not goes with the reputation of the company, or that may be bad for the reputation of the organization. And last, but the most important one, company house style. Whenever if I'm working in some organization and I'm communicating or I'm writing a letter, so I can communicate it to some external stakeholder. So it's very important that I should be using the company house style. Each and every company does have their own house style of letters. And the purpose of that house style is that whenever a receiver will going to see that letter, so he will get an idea, instantly he will get an idea that all right, this come from some specific company. So it can be like letterhead, for example. It's very common that companies are using their own letterheads with some logos and with their address and maybe some trademark if they're having. So all that will be included in their house style. More than that, companies using some specific font, specific spacing, line spacing, basically the text size they are using, and they are very specific to that. So every time when they are writing a letter, they are using the same formats. And the purpose is identification. So whenever a receiver is seeing that letter, quickly he can identify that from which company I got this letter. Clear with this?
Yes, sir.